Success, failure, and everything in between. Raising the business game together. Learn from leaders, innovators, and misfits on how to get made in China.
Hello, this is Preston Kuo from Beijing's luxury boutique hotel, The Opposite House, nestled in Sanlitun. Thanks for getting made with the smart and bubbly Lin Gao on episode 4 of the Made in China podcast. Lin is one of Amcham China's Board of Governors and former head of government relations for the company that built the first device that is now arguably the most important device in your daily life. It's probably what you're listening to this podcast on right now. Without it, you might be a fish out of water.
I am Chinese.
You're Chinese!
To start with, I'm Chinese. And I grew up in Beijing, so I'm a Beijing-ren.
Okay.
Let me tell you a little story. So there are two young fish swimming along. And they happen to meet an old fish swimming the other way, who nods at them and then says, "Morning, boys. How's the water?" And the two young fish swim on for a bit. And eventually, one of them look over the other and ask, "What the hell is water?" So the point of this story is that when you are that fish and you live in that water, then you don't really sense the existence of the water. So as a Chinese, when I was in China, I didn't really understand what Chinese culture is until I stepped out of that fishbowl, until I get myself immersed perhaps in another fishbowl with another pot of water. And that's when I started to see what China is, what Chinese culture is, and what being a Chinese means to me. So I think what makes me unique is that I was that young fish, but now I'm that old fish who has been to another pot of water.
Great. Oh, I love it. That's a great story. So having been in probably many different pots of water at this point in your career, tell me about one of the biggest losses or failures you've had in China in terms of business, and then I want to go after that, hear about one of your greatest successes.
I'm glad that you started with losses because I have a lot failure stories than success stories. Maybe it helps if I tell you what I do at work. So when I first moved back to China, 2004, it's about 10 years ago, I was an expat and I was leading an IT team in our company. So it was an internal role. And then after doing that for about 8 years, I felt like I was living in an expat bubble, that I am Chinese and I've been back to China for almost 10 years and I still don't know what doing business in China means. So that's when I started to think maybe doing an internal role like an IT lead does not really help me understand China and doing business in China. So that's when I went back to my boss and I said, I want to do something else. I wanted to do something that can really help me to understand China. And what else can be more challenging that can really help you to understand China than doing government relations, right? So that's how I got into government relations, what we call government affairs. And I thought, well, I thought it's hard. I mean, I never underestimated it. But what I didn't realize that one of my greatest challenge is, first of all, I don't really look like Chinese in a way. I'm too dark to look like a Chinese. And most people take me like a Filipino or ABC, because, ABC, they'll have very tan skin. So I don't look like Chinese. And then somehow I don't sound like Chinese either. So one of my number one challenges is to actually to be able to connect to the government officials that I'm talking to who look and sound and think nothing similar to me. And I remember one time I was in a conversation with government officials, and I was trying to make a case on something that they think that we were doing wrong, but I believe that we were doing it
Correct.
Legally.
Right.
So I sit there and I start a conversation. I make my case. And then after I'm done, he says 3 words in Chinese. 没听懂.
Whatever you said meant nothing to me.
Makes absolutely no sense to me. So then I sit there and I try to reflect what went wrong. And I realize that it's not what I said. It's how I said it. The American way that we assume that we're innocent. And I'm here to show to you how and why I'm innocent.
Right.
But then in his thinking is the Chinese way, right? He assumed that I'm not innocent,
Sure.
right? So then whatever I said sounds like I am making excuses.
Right.
So then I redo the whole thing. I mean, I started over and I start talking with a good attitude.
Right.
Attitude.
With the correct,
is
harmonious attitude.
everything.
Right.
And then this time, he said, I got it. So I think lessons learned from that one, it doesn't really matter. I mean, I remember having this conversation when I went back to the office and talking to our legal chief counsel. And she was telling me how from a legal term that, we're totally following the rule, we're innocent. And I remember telling her, I said, perception is the reality. It doesn't matter how you think, how I think. What matters is how that particular government official, what he thinks
about us, right?
So I think that's...
So the biggest mistake was going in and not seeing things from the other person's view.
Exactly. And in his context. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, tell me about a win now. Let's turn it around. Give me some success. Tell me something.
How about I offer you one success as a company, what people can learn from that, and then one more from a personal perspective, right?
I love it.
So on a company side, so if I just go back to my government affairs role, because I think people probably hear enough about how to work in China as a company, but like even with customers, probably people don't hear enough stories about how to work with government.
Okay.
And when they do, they probably hear it more like a bad story. And but what I'm trying to say is that if you work it the right way, there is a way to conquer and to get what you want. So this example is, so again, going back to the company that I work for, we have been in China for 27 years. And throughout these 27 years, we've got loads of investment here in China. But then as we reduce our size, we no longer need that much of a capital investment here in China. So we want to take some money back into our headquarters. Now, in the U.S., this must be something very simple. Companies grow, companies reduce sizes. Company has the right to take money anywhere they want because it's their money, right?
It's their money, right.
But then here in China, that's not necessarily that simple. So just to take money out of China, it's a huge, huge task. We've got people work on this for years. And we've got pressure from headquarters wanting that cash to maybe do some acquisitions and then maybe invest elsewhere. So there is a lot of internal pressure of getting that money back into the U.S. at certain time. But we were facing a challenge from the government that we're working with, of trying, as you're pulling money out of China, they need to sort of do an audit on everything that you have ever done up to that point. And then for a company that has been in China for that long, you are going to have something that they think that you did wrong, that you need to clean up. So to keep long story short, probably like a couple of days before our internal deadline is a quarter end, we still didn't get that one final chop that we needed. It's probably 1 out of 17 chops that we need to get. And then there's just tremendous pressure. And then finally my boss said, we just need to go back and then continue make our case, and then continue to explain. So in Chinese word, we call it mo. You know what I'm saying, Jim? It's like mo is like just kind of a back and forth process. But then at that point, I personally, I felt like this is no use. I felt like we're hitting the wall. It's no use. Doesn't matter how many times I'm going to say this. They're not going to listen to me. There's no way that I can get that final chop before quarter end. But then we did it anyway. And guess what? Miraculously, we actually got that final chop. Just right, like a couple of hours, I would say, before quarter end. It's just, you just have to be persistent. You just have to be persistent. And then it's all about finding the right person, telling the right story, and be persistent. I don't know what else. I mean, that's just probably one of my lessons learned from a success story as a company. I don't know what was the last turning point, but in my mind, I somehow think that perhaps the way that we told that story differently helped. And that argument was that if you can show to the world that taking money out of China is as easy as investing in China, then people would be more encouraged to invest in China.
Absolutely.
So you see how I tell this story positively,
right,
rather than saying, oh, if you don't let me take money out of China, then I am going to, I would never invest here.
Right,
and
right,
people
right,
would never
right.
want to
Threaten.
invest here.
Right.
You sort of turn it differently, you frame it differently.
How can what you're going to help me do benefit you?
Benefit you, exactly.
Yeah,
so
right.
It's always about how can I help you be more successful?
Yeah, I love it.
Not about how can I help me be successful, because no one really cares.
I think, and earlier this year or last year, we had interviewed Professor Stuart Diamond, the author of Getting More and Wharton Professor, and I think that's one of the things he talks about in his book.
Absolutely.
Is putting yourself in the other person's shoes. And I think that's great.
Yep.
I love that. It's a great negotiation win.
I see that people tend to connect and work with people that they are comfortable with, right? So that's why when you go to a networking environment, you can always see Chinese people huddled together with Chinese people, and expats huddled together with expats. And it doesn't matter how you push, you just don't see that mingle, the flow. And I think that's a failure on both sides, actually. I think that a lot of expats are living in that, what I call the expat bubble, that they just don't feel there's a need. And I don't think, honestly, I think they don't have the courage to step out, to make that initial step of making Chinese friends and to learn Chinese. And then the same way for Chinese people who is always conscious about, oh, maybe I don't speak perfect English, what value do I add to this conversation, to this relationship?
They're a boss. This is my higher level than me. Why would they value my opinion?
Exactly. So then that's why you still see that. You just don't necessarily see that connection and the flow that
comfort or freedom in between grouping or
different types of people,
right?
And I think that
cliques, like in high school, like cliques.
Yeah. So, but I think fresh ideas comes from people who are different from you, right? When you talk to people that are similar to you, you get the same opinion, right? Every time. How does that help you, right? So I think that's perhaps one thing that I feel like I'm consciously developing is to reach out to people who are different. And it's not comfortable. I admit, and I keep telling people that I am an introvert person, and people, no one believes that.
I don't believe it either. You're an introvert with extroverted skills.
But if I go to a networking event, guess what? I am scared too. I don't want to talk to a stranger. I don't. I would rather be in a corner drinking my Diet Coke. So, but then you just got to do that.
So when you say you just got to do that, though, what are the things that you specifically did to make that easier for you?
So I have been publishing a WeChat message with Hubert, my husband. He called himself a message coach because he trains people on public speaking. I call myself leadership coach, and in fact, I am certified leadership coach. So in one of the articles that I wrote, I specifically talked about how do you have small talks, basically. I mean, I think that's one thing that Chinese people most suffered because our small talk in our Chinese culture is very limited. It's all about food. It's basically when two people see each other, 你吃了吗? Have you eaten? We don't really, I mean, it's just not part of our culture to strike a conversation with strangers. So I specifically have, give people tips on how can they strike a conversation with. So
give me a few tips.
Like for example, start with the venue. Make a comment on a venue.
Sure.
What a nice place, And then when you start making a comment, the other person would respond, right? And then you gradually start talking. And then I think the whole point of networking, it's about finding commonalities among people that are different from you.
Sure.
So finding commonalities with people that are different from you. And that's the whole point of networking. Mm-hmm. So it's not about finding commonalities with people who are similar to you.
Sure,
right?
Sure.
So, yeah.
Great. I like... to recap, the personal success for you has been really knowing what you're comfortable with and then learning how to break out of that comfort and do more than that.
Absolutely.
And specifically is more around something more social.
Mm-hmm. And then that's applicable to both Chinese and
absolutely
foreigners.
Yeah, and I think it's really great that you also, in the stuff that you're writing, helps people do the how part. Because everyone knows what Chinese and foreign person goes, I should know to talk to more people. I should do this.
Right.
I should do that. And then the fact you say, well, I have some hints and some tips for you.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that also has really helped with Chinese making small talk, not so much the first time, but you had just talked about WeChat, but people posting things in WeChat. And a lot of our clients who are Chinese will say, before I go into a meeting with people, I will check their WeChats and see what they've done in their past few months. And then I'll be able to comment and feel comfortable easily because I have some connection. I see you just went on holiday to Thailand. I had also been to Thailand. Or, wow, that article you sent the other day really resonated with me.
Right.
So
that's a very helpful.
WeChat has been really great for helping people make some better small talk.
Yep.
So, Lin, you just talked about being a leadership coach. And that has a lot to do with my next question. Can you tell me a story where you've seen leadership at work, whether it was positive leadership or negative leadership, where you've seen leadership fail?
I think leadership is over-talked. It's like been overly emphasized. And that's why sometimes I feel a bit embarrassed telling people that I'm a leadership coach. Because first of all, how do you define leadership, right? Again, when I step out of that pot of water, when I reflect on Chinese culture, I think that one of the things that you find it in China is that people confuse the word leader and leadership. And leader in Chinese also has a very misleading translation. It's called 领导. And 领导 does not necessarily have leadership. So
what would be a translation, the English translation, if you were to put 领导 back into English, what would that be more like? Like a boss?
A boss.
Like a position of power.
Exactly. Someone who has authority over you, but not necessarily be able to influence you to do things that they want you to do willingly. Willingly is the key word. So I think leadership is all about how do you influence other people to do things willingly. But then when I translate into Lin Gao, it's a completely different story. And that's why I think a lot of people just don't get it. And that's why it is so difficult. So I have been reading a book lately on charisma, like leadership charisma, right? So when we say someone is a leader, one of the things that we always comment on is so-and-so has charisma. And then, so you know that Hubert and I, we run a training company. And one of the things that our clients have been telling us is that we have a lot of Chinese high potentials that they probably, get to manager, director position, but then they're not able to move up to that executive position because they just don't have the executive presence. And then people just don't know how to decode that executive presence. What exactly is executive presence? It's kind of like a myth that everyone talks about, but then nobody knows how to develop that. Is it the way that you dress? Is it the way that you talk? The way that you walk? I mean, we've all seen good leadership, right? Take, I guess, Bill Clinton as an example.
Sure.
People often say that when you are in a conversation with him, he makes you feel that you are the most important person in the world at that moment. So on the flip side, we often see people, when they're talking to you, they're checking their email, they're playing with their cell phone, they're answering phone calls, unnecessary phone calls, and they make you feel like
You don't matter.
you don't matter. Like, and then you sit there and you ask yourself, why am I here?
Why am I here?
Why am I here, right? So then that's just one. I mean, when you think of leadership, you think about something grand, but it's not. It's that small things that you do that make people
feel valued, feel listened to.
Exactly. So I think a lot of times, as a leadership coach, we coach people on leadership behavior, because only when they have the right leadership behavior, that's when they have the right mindset, and that's when they become good leaders.
And when people will want to follow them.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Great. Something that's very important for all organizations and people is to remain curious and to keep learning. Is there something that you do every day that you think may have contributed to your attitude, to your curiosity, to your passion?
I think one thing that you mentioned about learning is very important. In training, we always say that employees need to spend 70% of the time is on the job training. 20% of the time is actually going into a training course, perhaps. And then 10% of the time is really about being coached or being mentored by someone. I would say that all of that wouldn't matter if the individual does not reflect on what he or she does. And I think on that point, I consider myself doing maybe a little bit better than other people, is I reflect a lot.
So I think it's the desire to be more self-aware.
Absolutely. And make that part of your practice.
Right.
Part of your routine.
Yeah, your habit.
Your habit.
So what are the specific things that you've done that have helped you to continue to practice being more self-aware? I think that's a very hard thing to do.
It's very hard, but then you can start from something very simple. For example, you know that I'm in Toastmasters, right? And I one time I was competing in a speech contest, and I had a speech coach. And he said, you talk too fast. And I said, what do you mean? I mean, it's a 7-minute speech. I have the speech about 700 words. And I thought that's okay. And he said, no, you need to cut it to 400 words. Half. I said, no way. I mean, there's no way that I can finish my story in 400 words. So I didn't listen to him. So at the end, I probably stick to about 500 something. And it's a humorous speech. I'm sorry, this story is a bit long. So anyway, I competed, and as a humorous speech, I did not go over time, but almost, because I forgot in a humorous speech, people laugh. So that laugh actually added a lot of time. And then because I was trying to rush, so I cut people's laugh halfway because I need to move on.
Next joke.
Right. So then that's when I realized, okay, maybe he was right. Maybe I talked too fast. And then that's when I started to, just in terms of speaking, I consciously be more aware. So when I see people not following me, then I immediately tell myself, slow down, slow down. You see the other person may not be following me. Maybe I need to slow down. So it's all about...
Or make a change, right? So
like stepping out of yourself. I don't know how to say it. I always call it like having a third eye looking over you.
Right.
You step out of yourself and then you see you're talking too fast. And that's one example. But then a lot of other times, coming back to leadership behavior, one of my biggest, I call it leadership sin, is I want to win too much. Like everything, I feel like I have to win an argument. I have to win. I have to be right. I have to win. I just have to win. And then I see that becoming a barrier for me, not just as a leader, but also as a mother. When you constantly try to prove to your children that you are always right, that's not good. So then one of the things that I start to be more aware is every time when I caught myself trying to win an argument, I will stop and then I will reflect and I will ask myself, am I really trying to prove my point, or am I really just trying to prove that I am right? So then that's how I reflect. And I really think that doesn't matter how many training, how many coaching that goes in, if you as individual don't take responsibility of your own behavior and don't reflect, it's not going to work.
So it kind of is going back and looking at yourself and going, why am I doing this again?
Ask yourself why.
What's your goal? Like, what's the whole reason for this? So I had done something kind of similar. I had purchased a scooter because in Shanghai it's great to zip around on a scooter. And I was like, get the big engine, get this, get all this stuff. And then when I look back at it, I was like, I have a kid now. I don't need to be going very fast. The only reason I'm doing this is because I hate sitting in traffic. So
and you wanted to look cool.
Yeah. And I was like, how cool is it? So I ended up getting an ugly, common bike because it was a way for me to zip my wife around and to get from place to place conveniently.
And you don't have to worry about being stolen.
Yeah, exactly. And not being stolen, right? That as well. But so the bigger thing was I was caught up in all these things without going back to why am I doing this again? And when you refocus and recenter, it seems, oh yeah. But it's hard to be present and think of that why constantly, right?
Yeah. I think presence is something that you said it's the key. You just have to be in that moment. If you're not in that moment, you can never see yourself differently.
So from one person who coaches to another, I talk a lot about triggers. What is a good trigger that helps you to stay present with people? I saw you just do it with me. Was you looked in my eyes and by reading my face, you made it change. It also seems that for a lot of these goals you're making, the point is not about you. It's even when we're talking about this, with trying to win an argument with your kid. In the end, you are oftentimes the second or third or least important person. The most, even with your earlier talk about negotiation,
right?
You are thinking about, how do I protect me? How do I save our company? How do I make our point? As opposed to going, who are you? What do you need? What's important? What am I here to do, right? So what has helped you to stay in that frame of mind? For me, it's really just been it's not about me. It's not about me. How can I help you? How can I help you? That's like my big question. How can I help you? Is there another way that helps you to refocus?
I think also listening to your own body
Okay,
really
what do you mean?
helps.
Tell me about that.
Like when you are making other people uncomfortable, you actually are making yourself uncomfortable in a way. Like you can feel your stomach is twisting, and you can feel like there's some sort of a emotion going on, right? Like you're trying to make the argument, you want it to be right. And then if you can just sense that, then
If you're not enjoying the conversation,
then chances are the other person is not either.
and it's not, no one likes to move forward when you're not having a good time.
Exactly.
Right?
So I feel like we're not really in tune with our body, with our mind. And that really goes hand in hand, body and mind. You really just have to be in tune to yourself. And that's what I mean by reflection.
Now, what are the top tools that you are suggesting and doing yourself, maybe more for yourself, in helping you improve? You said you're attending Toastmasters. You said you're reading a book. What other type of things do you really think are helping you to learn and that you think can help others?
So I talked about the importance of reflecting, right? And a lot of that is really in combination with just on-the-job training, right? You do it, and then that's how you learn. I mean, I don't think at this point of our career it helps to just learn the theory but don't really practice. So it's kind of like, this interview I did last week. And this guy asked, how can I have my children to understand more about Chinese culture without sending them to China? And this is, a guy is a Chinese guy. And I was like, sitting there and thinking, well, you can't, because you just have to be in China to learn Chinese culture. So the fact that your children are in the U.S., it's just, I don't know what else you can do, right?
It's hard to swim when you're not in water.
Exactly. So I think on-the-job training is important. But I personally, I've started a journey doing a DBA, a Doctor of Business Administration, 6 years ago. And I thought is something very easy, because if you haven't noticed that we Chinese people are very good at studying and an exam, right? So I thought this is something that, I study and then I memorize it and then I go to an exam and I pass and then I get a doctorate degree. But little did I know that it has nothing to do with memorization. So it's all about doing research. It is about critical thinking. And if you haven't noticed, that's perhaps one thing that we Chinese people are sort of lacking. Pretty much our first day of school, so the professor told us that as a doctor, we're going to make a contribution to the body of knowledge. And that whole sentence is foreign to me.
Yeah.
I was like, what is body of knowledge? And contribution? Me making a contribution to the body of knowledge? Never thought about that.
Right.
Never. I know how to do things. I'm good at that. I know how to solve problems. I'm good at that. But making a contribution to the body of knowledge, totally didn't get it. So our first task is to do literature review, right? And then we need to critique on literature. And that the word critique, it's so challenging. I remember telling my professor, I said, I don't understand what to critique. These are published papers, published by renowned professors. What do you want me to critique? As a Chinese student, we learn. We don't argue. We don't critique.
Yeah, you don't question. You
don't
learn
question.
And you follow, right?
Exactly. So that whole process of applying critical thinking skill, it's something that me personally, in the past 6 years, over my DBA journey, that's what's really, I guess, my most valuable lesson in terms of learning is really to learn differently.
What have you learned from being a child, a parent, or a significant other that's made you a better business person, helped you in your business?
So I think your question is, as a woman, we wear multiple hats. We have different roles in our life, right? Which hat do I wear that actually impacted me most in the business world, right?
Sure.
In a way, this might surprise you. I actually think that being a mother probably helped me the most in terms of developing leadership skills, in terms of being a better listener, in terms of being able to appreciate, to empathize with other people. Like when my son goes out, I would be telling him, "Oh, bring a jacket. It's cold outside. Wear more." And then he would refuse. And then I would insist, putting on a jacket. I remember one time my son said something to me that really got me thinking. So while I was forcing to put on a jacket on him, and he's telling me repeatedly, he feels hot. It's hot outside. And I just didn't listen. And then he said one thing. He said, "Mom, you are not me. You don't know how I feel." And I thought, that's true. I'm not him. So he's telling me that he's hot. And I didn't think it's hot. But then I'm not him. So how would I know, right? In the business world, when you are leading a team, you oftentimes use your own assumptions and judgment, and then you apply that to everyone who works for you or with you, and that's just taking nowhere. You just really have to recognize that they're all different individuals, and don't apply your own assumptions. Now, I would tell my son, I think it's cold outside. I would recommend you to wear a jacket. But if you don't, and if you ended up getting sick, you still need to go to school. You still need to play piano. So you decide.
What concerns you the most, professionally or personally? What concerns you right now?
I want to do too much in my life. I feel like I'm too greedy in terms of wanting to do more. And I'm afraid that I'm not able to focus on doing one thing really well. So I'm concerned that I ended up doing a lot of different things, but then at the end didn't achieve anything. If I feel like I am always in a hurry, then I started to reflect, am I having too much stuff on my plate? And then we have this mutual friend, Mark DeWall. I remember one thing that he told me. I still don't think I can do that, but at least I can see how other people do it. So he said that every time when he buys a new shirt, he would take out one old shirt from his closet and throw it away and then put the new shirt in. So in that way, he's not overcrowding his closet. So I think same thing. Every time when I put a new thing on my plate, I need to think about,
there's only so much room in your closet.
Which one do I drop?
Yeah.
Right? If I can't figure out which one I drop,
can't add something
then I
new.
can't add something new. So that's why I haven't really been that much involved with Toastmasters in the past couple of years, because I'm working on
other stuff you want to work on.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's great. No, I love it. That's really great. If this is about peer learning, what would you like to hear in this series? What type of questions do you still have asked? Or what's a challenge or problem that you hope someone can address to help you?
Right. So I wanted to tie it back to the what keeps me awake at night question, right? What I'm at most concerned of, that I'm hoping some other people with more wisdom can help address, is when would you really know that you have found your
Your why.
Your why, and then what you're truly good at, and then you kind of decide, oh, this is the thing. This is why I am here. Because I think once you find that, it's going to be a very exciting journey. The rest of the journey doesn't matter how difficult it is. But until you got that answer, you're still sort of exploring. You're still, like for me, I'm interested in many different things. But then I got to settle in one thing. I can't be like always exploring. So I would really want to hear how other people, when did they see that moment? It just clicked. It's that aha moment. When do they know? I remember asking that question to some people, and the answer I got is, you know it when the moment comes.
Yeah, that's really helpful.
And that's not really helpful.
Thanks.
I bet that's true. But how can I tell? That's what I'm here for. And maybe there is an answer. Maybe life is just about exploring.
Sure.
That's
a great question. A friend of mine had asked that question, and I had told him, and I think people have said this a lot, if you had all the money in the world.
Yeah, basically,
right?
That's the question.
What would you
do?
Keep doing? And I think a way that has helped a lot of people figure that out is just going to something as easy as, where am I most happy? Like, for me, talking to people and listening to them makes me the happiest ever. And so the idea of doing this podcast, because I talk to really great people all the time, and after I talk to them, I'm like, that was so cool. Man, I can't wait to tell my friend this, or that helped me so I can't wait to tell my mom this. Mm-hmm. And then the advice or the next steps I took was, as I got more and more into speaking and keynoting and training and this, it was the idea for me just love talking to people. And I think that's what helped me to move into what I am great at. So maybe what makes you the most happy?
I think that's a good question. Yeah. So nowadays, when I have to evaluate what's on my plate, I often ask myself, out of all these things, which one I am doing it because I just want to do it, and which one I'm doing because I think it's going to make more money, Right. So yeah.
But they ask the question, what makes you really happy?
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Last question.
Right.
Last question. Come on.
Okay.
You're not letting you out that easy. It's the last day on Earth. What's the most important thing you want to share? The most important thing that you want people to know about you, or the last piece of advice you want to give? And I asked this in a very tough way. This is the last day. We're all going to die one day, and we're going to leave. We're going to leave our kids. Mm-hmm. So I want to know what you're going to tell your son.
You always have choices. Always. And you can choose to be positive, or you can choose to be negative. So for me, I've always tried to at least choose to be positive and choose to tell myself a positive story. And I hope that's something that can help other people.
Thank you very much. I had a wonderful time listening to you today.
Me too.
Thanks again for getting made with us at the Made in China podcast. The Sunny Lin Gao, Amcham China, the Opposite House Made in China podcast advisors, and Team China Foundations. And of course, thank you to our audience from all of us for trusting us with your most valuable time to listen and give all this great feedback that we've been receiving over the past 2 weeks. Keep the feedback coming. Keep us honest. And if you like what you're hearing, please keep sharing.
You've been listening to Made in China, a podcast that raises the business game in China. We need your help. Tell us what you want and share the stories that matter. Check the show notes and more information about the show at getmadeinchina.com. That's getmadeinchina.com.